Hotapu, welcome to our next installment of our studies of the Pa'ut of Kemet. Recall that Pa'ut mean the maps of spirit, and in our last video, we learned about the map of Khepera, the god of becoming. And there you learn about fractals and a few key words such as self-similarity, scale invariance, and such. So feel free to go back to that video and review it. You won't need it for this video, but it will give you a healthy background to understand where we're moving towards. So, let's go forward in our video of Annu. So now we move forward to the study of the cosmology of Annu, of Heliopolis, encoded in the work or the scripture of our Genesis story called the Book of Knowing the Manifestations of Ra and of Destroying Apop or Evil in Ourselves. Now, the scripture states that the first thing made in the manifested universe was polarity, duality, and opposition. It is this polarity that sets up the whole game of life, where we can now have opposites that lose their balance and then have an adventure of trying to find it again. This we call movement, this we call activity, this we call yin and yang, fire and water. Now, in the actual text, it states, the first god of this duality opposition was called Shu. Now, Shu is nothing but the principle of fire and heat. But I have renamed him for our cosmology of the golden beetle from Shu to the deity of magical fire. This is Wacha, Lord of Fire. Now, the next deity was called Tefnut, who is water, the hydroid principle. I renamed it to the Lord of Magical Water, Nekabu, magical water. Now, these two principles are key. They are the foundation of all of life. And with these two dualities, these two forms of diversity, we begin the adventure of personality in the universe. So, Wacha, or fire, is outgoing force, yang force, heat. All biochemical functions need heat. And water, or Nekabu, is the environment in which all biochemical activities occur. So you have fire and heat, yang, and yin water. Now, these refer to the primal states of the universe, and they have in themselves a high and a low maximum. So, Shu, or Wacha, or fire, at its climax, its top, is called hot. When there is no fire, no heat, we call it cold. So Shu, or Wacha, has two forms, hot and cold. Then we have Nekabu, or Tefnut, also has two forms. When there's a lot of Nekabu, we call it wet. That's a lot of Nekabu, a lot of moisture. When we have no moisture, we call it dry. So again, Wacha, fire, has a top phase of hot and a low phase of cold. And Nekabu, water, has wet and dry. So, these form the beginning of all forms in the universe and all forces. So you're either hot and dry or cold and wet. Now, you know this in nature, you know this in your life as spring, summer, fall, winter. Now, these forces of spring, summer, fall, winter are conversations about heat and cooling, light and dark. So in the spring, it's warm. Summer, it's hot. In the fall, it's cooling. In the winter, it's cold. Now, these are four major stations within the thermo-hydro principle of the universe. Now, I know my words may sound a bit complicated, but I'm sure you're following. It's simply spring, summer, fall, winter of everything in life. Now, the Kamau encoded these 4 turning points in the thermohydro principle by deities. So we call the warming phase meow. In the text it says nebethet, but I call it meow, the cat god. Meow is like spring, the phase of something that is just beginning. It's warm, heating up, and it's a bit moist and wet. Then we have the hot phase of summer. That was called Ra. In the text it's called Heru Anmaati, but we call it Ra in our system. Then we have the cooling fall phase. That I call Sebek Set. It is called Set in the text. I have changed it to adapt to our cosmology as Sebek Set, the fall force, the cooling and drying principle. And then finally we have the winter phase, which is called Ast in the text, which I have renamed as Khonsu, the moon god. Both are moon deities. So we have meow, spring, warm and moist. In spring, things are getting warming, a little hotter, but not yet hot, yet there's still wetness from the winter. So it's warm and wet. Then in summer, the summer heat dries out the moisture and increases hot. So we have hot and dry. That is Ra. In the fall, we have Sebek Set, representing it's getting cooler, but there's no moisture yet. So we call that cold and dry. And finally, we have winter, which is called Khonsu, where it's cold and wet, because when it's wintry, bodies hold on to their moisture. Trees and roots guard their water. So, at the center of this 4-fold seasonal fluctuation, we have Amun, consciousness observing this motion. So each of these 4 states represent personalities. You are either a spring-like person, joyous, fun-loving, artistic, or a summery person, an alpha, an aggressive person, an athlete, or an executive. Or you're more like a cold and dry person, a student, academician, someone who goes by the book, or you're cold and wet. This is Khonsu. You're very emotional and family-oriented and sensitive. This fluctuation occurs within, finally, 2 deities. After Shu Tefnut, after Wacha Nekabu was made, what was called in the text Nut, the sky, we call Geba, and then Geb, the earth god. Nut represents, or Geba represents the 12 signs of your zodiac chart. And Geba, or Geb, represents the 12 houses. So in the Annu Pa'ut, we have the beginning of astrology based upon the fluctuation of heat, light, cold, and dark, encoded by these 10 gods: Wacha, Nekabu, Geba, Geb, Amun, Ra, Miao, Sebekset, Khonsu. This becomes the most important teaching because, as we learn in the future, in the human Pa'ut, it is these primordial gods of creation that make you have the personality, good luck, or bad luck that you have in your chart. So this Annu Pa'ut is the chart of the universe. And in our next videos, we'll begin talking about the charts within humans. Dwawend Hotepu. So Hotepu, I want to give you one more additional gift about the teachings of the Annu Pa'ut. And that's, we discussed that each one of the phases of thermal hydroenergy were hot, cold, dry, and moist. But I want to give you a tip that I'll go into more detail during our workshops that really go into spiritual depth on these concepts. Hot means raises the energy. That was Wacha, or fire. Cold means lowers the energy. Dry means breaks connections, and moist means makes connections. So, if you are a hot and dry athletic alpha, you like to raise the energy through heat, but break connections through being aggressive. If you are the cold and wet type, the lunar, home, nurturing types, You like to lower your energy and not move around too much. Be a homebody from the cold. And the water makes you want to form bonds and connections of love and caring. If you are warm and moist, the spring meow type. Warm means you have energy, and the moist means you want to make connections energetically through love, romance, and such. And finally, Sebekset, the fall force, is cold and dry. Cold means you like to be reclusive and introverted, not very energetic. And the dry means you break connections. You're a bit of, shall we say, a wonderful nerd. You prefer being by yourself. So you may find in these descriptions your own personality traits. But tune into our workshops coming up to learn much more about this in your astrology charts. Dwawend Hotepu.